Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Birth and Baby Talk. My name is Megan from Family Doulas of Ottawa, and I am running solo today. I usually have Leanne with me, but I'm going to do this one on my own, which is very exciting. And we're going to talk to you guys about high needs babies. So I'm sure that everyone has heard of this term before. Maybe you have a baby with where you describe them as high needs. Maybe you have a friend who has a high needs baby, but we've heard this term thrown around a little bit in the parenting community, and I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about it today, because sometimes it can have like a negative connotation with it, which is not the case. We just use it to describe babies with specific characteristics, which I'm going to go over as well. And the reason I wanted to chat with you guys about it today is because I actually had a high needs baby and it shocked me. So a little bit of backstory. I have two children. My daughter is 11 and my son is 9 now. So obviously my daughter came first, and she was, for all intents and purposes, a really easy baby, a really easy toddler. And I just thought that was the way babies were. It was really early in my doula career. I was focused mostly on birth. I didn't really do a lot of postpartum, so I didn't really understand there were different kinds of babies. Like, you heard about the really extremes, so you had like a colicky baby or what have you, but not a high needs baby. So Thea, my daughter, super easy, breastfed really easy. She, was on a really good schedule, like every 3 hours. I like breastfed her, changed her diapers. She was a baby you could take to a play group and lay on the floor, and she would happily just kind of like gurgle, look at toys, play with other kids. Went in the baby carrier, went for walks. She was really easy. And there were lots of times where I didn't really understand what everyone was talking about and how their babies were so difficult, because for me it wasn't really the case. Anyway, fast forward 21 months later, and my son Jackson was born. And I remember the first night in the hospital turning to my husband and being like, this is different. Something is different, and this baby is intense. So it can happen like that, where you're just like a little shocked almost. Now, if people do it the other way around, where your first baby is high needs and your second baby is really chill, it's like, that's kind of actually nice, because then you're like, oh yeah, I've been through this before. Like, I can do this. So this is a reason why I like to chat with everybody about high needs babies, because I found it really, really shocking. So a lot of times with high needs babies, it is exactly like that. Like, you as a parent just know that something's a little bit more intense, where you're like, things feel a little bit more escalated. And a lot of times it can be really hard, and you often ask yourself or other people, like, or your doctor, your caregiver, is like, why is my baby so demanding? Like, why is this so difficult to go through? Am I doing something wrong? Am I not being a good parent? Like, and of course the answer is no. I mean, you do nothing wrong. Like, it's like people having different characteristics, right? Or different personality traits. So we'll go through a few of the characteristics of a high needs baby. It differs obviously depending on the researcher or the doctor who are describing it, but there's usually a standard. There's about 12 different characteristics of high needs babies. They don't always apply to the same baby. You might have like, 5 or 6 or, 7 or 8 characteristics, and the other stuff is pretty normal. So we'll just go through them one by one. You might have an aha moment where you're like, oh yeah, because I know for me, I did a lot of educating myself when Jackson was a baby, because it's like, something is different and I need to know what it is, if there's something I can do to make it a little bit easier for him, because at the end of the day, they're just little babies and they're trying to communicate, and they're just having a little bit of a harder time doing it. So the first characteristic is intense. So everything just seems more intense, and that was like my experience that first night in the hospital, where he just felt intense. Like, he was almost just like really wired up. You could almost like feel it in his little body. Like, everything was so intense, from like, and usually with a newborn, it's the crying. The crying was just like this elevated crying, and not like he was in pain, but just that he wanted something. And I wasn't quick enough to give it to them. So there's a lot of like intensity that comes with high needs babies. And they also put a little bit more energy into everything. So there's a lot more energy going into their request for something. So whether they're hungry or their diaper's wet or they want to be held or comforted, there's just like a more intense ask for it. I guess, yeah, for lack of a better phrase. Yeah. The second thing is they tend to be a little bit hyperactive or hypertonic. And that's just, it's not a bad thing at all, but they're a little bit more like some telltale signs, or they're a little bit more like rigid. So if you ever have a baby that really like stiffens up or like arches their back when they're upset, or even when they're feeding, they're a little bit like, as they get older, a little bit more like gymnasticy when they're feeding. Like they just can't settle. Like they just can't like take it down a notch. So they're just a little bit more, yeah, hyperactive. And you can see that physically with them as well. The other thing is that high needs babies can be really, really draining. That's not so much a characteristic of them, but of the way they make you feel. And draining sounds like a negative word. So some people have used the word siphoning, where they're just taking more out of you. And it's not like you have, as a parent, it's not like you have nothing left to give. Like obviously you're going to give your baby everything you can, but it's just really, really draining. And we hear that a lot with parents who have more, I mean, every parent feels drained at some point, but with high needs babies, you just feel like you're doing all the things. Like you've done single thing and it doesn't matter. They still want more. They're still upset, you know, and you've gone through the list of all the things you can do. Also, you've not only have you like fed them, changed them, they've napped, all that kind of stuff. You've also like taken them for a walk, taken them for a car ride, like stimulated them, put them in the bouncy chair, put them in like the swing. Like, so you literally went through your list of things that could calm them, and it just didn't work. So it can be very, very draining. And that's definitely a term that we hear often for high needs babies. One of the other things is they can feed more frequently. This isn't like the case with every high needs baby. I know with my son, he definitely was more of a cluster feeder than my daughter. So he fed continuously all the time. And we know obviously that breastfed babies are not, or babies in general, but normally breastfed babies are breastfeeding not because they need sustenance, but for, you know, to help them calm and like comfort them and help them soothe themselves. And with Jack, like with my son as well, like there were times where he just wanted to just like be on my breast. Like he wasn't even eating necessarily. It was just where he was comforted. So that can happen as well. I mean, again, not with every high needs baby, but they do need a little bit more kind of that soothing. So some people who either, you know, I mean, it's really hard to continuously breastfeed a baby all day. I mean, you might have other kids, you might have other things you need to do, you might be working. You also, you know, need to like take care of yourself. So it's kind of hard to imagine feeding a baby continuously all through the day, even though they need that comfort. So some people turn to, you know, soothers and things like that, just to give them a little bit more of that comforting, the comfort that they get from like sucking. So that's always an option as well. But that is something that we definitely see with high needs babies, is the frequent eating for sure. Another characteristic, which kind of goes with draining, is they're really demanding. They're demanding babies. So they're not the baby who is going to lay on the play mat with the little toys for any extended period of time. They're going to need to switch that up. They're demanding in terms of, you know, wanting extra comfort, extra food, extra snuggles, all that kind of stuff. And again, that is not abnormal for babies. Obviously, babies want to be held, comforted, fed. All of that is so normal. A high needs baby just needs it more often and continuously, and they're more demanding of that. So again, little bit different than like you putting the baby down on their play mat for like 10 minutes and everything being fine, as opposed to like 30 seconds maybe, and then you need to like go and like pick them back up and give them a snuggle and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, the demand is definitely higher with the high needs babies for sure. The other thing that kind of shocked me when I was going through it, and also when I was educating myself on it, was the frequent waking. Now, again, it doesn't happen with every high needs baby, but for me personally, it was during the day for his napping. So I actually started to keep a sleep journal, which I had never done with my daughter. I just didn't feel like I needed to do it. He was waking up so much during the day that I thought I was going crazy. I was like, there's no way he could have only slept for 6 minutes. That's not even possible. Like, I must just be busy and like not paying attention. So I started to log his like waking throughout the day. And it was 12 minutes, 7 minutes, 6 minutes. Like every time he went down for a nap, it was just this tiny, tiny, tiny chunk of time. And this is all like in the first 3 months as well. So this is before we had any kind of like sleep schedule or nap schedule or anything sort of like that. And he just wasn't even showing those kind of natural progressions into naps. Like we see that in babies where, you know, you can see kind of when the naps are going to happen. Like in, you know, in the first couple of months, you're like, oh, they're sleepy at 9 and then again at 11 and then at 1. And you can kind of tell. With high needs babies, it's often not like that. He's still often just like wake, and it's continuous. So if you have a high needs baby and you feel like they're waking up all the time and you think you're going a little crazy, I would definitely recommend just doing a sleep log for maybe like a week, not even, just to see. And so you have kind of like a log of what's been going on. So too, when you go into your checkups or you see your caregiver, you can like show it to them and be like, is there anything I can do about this? Like what, you know, this is what's been happening basically. Not this is really anything you can do about it, but it's just kind of, for me, it gave me peace of mind basically that I wasn't going crazy. The other thing is that they seem unsatisfied a lot of the time. Like they're just, doesn't really matter what you do. They just are like, oh, this isn't working for me anymore. So whether you have, you know, you take them to you take them outside for a little walk and they're not really satisfied with that. You know, you take them for a walk around the house. They're not really satisfied with that. You show them a toy. So it's just more of like, kind of, they're just not, fully like not happy, but they're just unsatisfied with kind of like the environment and things that are happening. Like you kind of really need to switch it up and keep it really fluid to keep it kind of them happy basically. Definitely unpredictable. Usually when we have our babies, we get to know really soon kind of like what they like and what they don't like. Like, oh, this, you know, they really like the ring sling, or they like to sleep in the bassinet, or they really like the swing or the bouncy chair, all of those things. And it's kind of not quite the same with a high needs baby, not totally, but you definitely have to switch things up a little bit in order to keep them kind of happy. So they are definitely unpredictable in that case. Also unpredictable in a way where, like I gave the example of taking my daughter to a play group and laying her down. Like I would take her to a play group, lay her down on a mat, and I knew that whole time I was there would be no issues. There'd be nothing to worry about. She wouldn't be fussy. She wouldn't care. Everything would be fine. She'd eat well. It would all be good. With my son, who was high needs, I didn't know what that was going to look like on any given day. So you would have a good day, and then you would have another day where he would just be like super upset, really fussy, really clingy, really crying. And then the next day he would be fine. So the environment didn't really matter. It was more kind of like the day to day. So definitely unpredictable for sure. It's not something you can kind of map out at all. Super sensitive is another characteristic. And never like in a negative way. I never want to use the word sensitive in any kind of like none of these are negative, but I am very careful because I don't like any baby or child or person to be described as sensitive in any kind of like negative way. There's nothing wrong with being sensitive. So with high needs babies, they're super sensitive. And that again has to do with changes in environment. So if you go into like a really loud room, right, they might be more sensitive than someone else. If you go into a really bright area, they might be really sensitive. If you hand them off to a different person, they might be really sensitive to that change. So there's lots of things that can kind of trigger that, where it's just really overwhelming for them and can be a lot to deal with. They like a secure environment, so that's why they mostly want to be with one of their parents, because they feel really safe and secure with them. And they can just be really, and things can be really overwhelming too. So, and you might see that with a high needs baby going into toddlerhood, right? Where a really loud play group or a really loud classroom even, or like a preschool or a daycare, where they're the kids who kind of walk in and are like, whoa, this is really intense and I don't really know what to do or where to go. And they want to find kind of a safe space or a place where like the other kids aren't playing, where they can kind of go over and like assess the situation. So they're definitely a little bit more sensitive in that sense. Though I've seen it, it's really interesting though, because really sensitive babies and kids they develop a lot of empathy later in life. They're really empathetic people. So it's always a positive thing as well. You just have to be aware as a parent that they're not going to be the kid that runs into the playground and like jumps on the slide with the other kids and like does all that, right? And it's like they're going to definitely take a minute, assess the situation, figure out where their secure place is, and then go there. And then often once they're there and they feel good and they've sorted it out, then they're more than likely to like run off and play with the other kids and be very comfortable. They just like need a minute, and they don't need to be like forced into it either. So that's another thing. You can't put the baby down with a high needs baby for sure. If you can use a baby carrier, that's awesome, because that's a good way for you to have the baby on you, but still be able to like, have some food or do the dishes or make a call or like watch some TV or whatever you want to do with two hands, basically. And then the baby is sleeping on you, which is really, really great. Or it's also a really good tool if you're like running errands. So if you're going into a store and the baby's on you, they also might feel more secure. That kind of goes back to the security thing. It can be really difficult to have a baby that you can't put down. It can be extremely exhausting and taxing for sure. Having a baby carrier kind of like physically helps you out because you're not straining your body as much. And it's just, that's where they want to be. I mean, the bottom line is that all babies, not just high needs babies, want to be on you all the time. It's obviously not realistic 24 hours a day, but as much as you can do it is never a bad thing for sure. They're not really self-soothing, high needs babies. That kind of went back to the frequent feeding. They have a little bit of a harder time self-soothing, whether that's with a soother or their thumb or their fist or whatever. They have a hard time calming themselves down. Again, all babies in that 4th trimester, we don't expect them to self-soothe. That's unrealistic for sure. But high needs babies have definitely a harder time. So you just want to be very gentle with that as well, right? They're obviously having a hard time and they need a little bit of help from their parents. They definitely have separation sensitivities for sure. So again, that's like going to like a different caregiver, grandma and grandpa, daycare, anything like that. They're going to have a bit of a harder time. Like I said, they're not going to be the kid that runs into the daycare and like starts playing with all the other kids. They're probably going to need a minute to kind of assimilate into that situation. Those are the main characteristics of a high needs baby. So if you see any of these in your baby, whether they're like super intense or just kind of like low lying, you probably have a bit of a high needs baby. And it's not to label them. It's not to give them a label or, put them in a box or anything. It's just for you as a parent to maybe read a little bit about it, educate yourself a bit about it, and understand how to help them navigate the world as they get a little bit older. And now as little babies, it's a little bit easier because they're always with you, but as they become toddlers, it's your job to help them kind of navigate the world, and it can be big and bright and scary. One thing I took away from having a high needs baby was that every kid is different, which, I mean, seems obvious, but I think it surprised me a little bit. It always seems a bit strange when you have two children with two parents being raised in the same environment. So it's kind of interesting, the nature versus nurture debate. And so that kind of surprised me. But what I did is I just did a lot of reading. I really cater to them both differently and how they handle situations and how they handle the world. If you're looking for some interesting articles, you can definitely Google. There's a term, it's like orchid child versus dandelion child, and it's the idea that an orchid takes like a lot of work to have it grow, and a dandelion takes like nothing at all, and they're still fine. So there's a few things that you can kind of read up on and kind of educate yourself. It can be really interesting. And the best thing to do is just kind of figure out what works for your baby, and to the best of your ability kind of cater to them and help them navigate this crazy world. So that's it for me. It was lovely to be here today and to chat a little bit about high needs babies. Obviously, if you have any questions, you can send them, or comments, you can post them as well. If you have any great advice, if you've had a high needs baby and there's any really good resources or things that you did that helped you out, we'd love to hear them. Next week, so Wednesday, July 21st, Meghan from Toronto is doing The Secret Language of Babies, and she has a special guest, Kenzie Bukovich, is going to be with her as well. So I think that'll be a really interesting chat too. It was great to be here, guys. See you later.